Welcome everybody to this webinar that we've pulled together with our partners SRM. I'm proud to announce that with us today we have Heyrick Bond Gunning, CEO of SRM, and Roddy Priestley, Director of Cybersecurity at SRM. Today's we're talking about obviously ransomware and really looking deep into what you would encounter with this adversary. So let me pass over now to Roddy.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Ian. So Heyrick and I are from SRM. I'm a director on the cyber team based in London. My role at SRM on the cyber team, I've been heavily involved in a lot of our response engagements, particularly ransomware. This is something that's been keeping us busy for a couple of years. I'll be taking you through the rest of the presentation, which is about understanding your adversary. Before I do, I'll hand over to Heyrick to introduce himself, and then I'll start the presentation.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Roddy. I think you'll find the next 30 minutes or so pretty interesting. As you may well know, SRM is a cybersecurity and corporate investigations business, and we have been inundated with ransomware response cases over the past 12 months. And this session really just draws on the experience that we've had over those 12 months, looking after a huge variety of clients. And having said that, there are key things that come out of almost all of the ransomware response cases that we operate on, and those are the things that Roddy's going to focus on in his session before handing back over to Ian. So, Roddy, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Heyrick. So I think, Heyrick, you've covered SRM. I mean, I guess the key point from my perspective is that we have handled an enormous amount of ransomware cases. They're pretty indiscreet in terms of the companies that they attack. We've been involved supporting companies of all different shapes and sizes across all different verticals. We can do a lot of our response work on a remote basis. So we've supported clients in all sorts of jurisdictions and countries that have suffered these events. So they're pretty indiscreet. They are very difficult events to manage as a victim. And what we'll try and the objective of this session is to share our experience, and particularly thinking about sharing an understanding from a management and a senior executive position. What are the things that executives face in a ransomware attack? What are the specific challenges that these types of attack make it so difficult to respond to? And one of those is that you're actually facing a real adversary. So responding to a live person who's looking to do damage to your company in real time needs very quick decision making. And so what we'll do is we'll try and share some of our experience about how you put together a strategy for that response, and hopefully that will inform some of your thinking about the planning you're doing for this threat. So just touch on the agenda. I'll do a little bit of background for ransomware, just what we're seeing. Talk about the importance of threat intelligence in a ransomware attack, and why it's really important to build a profile of the attacker that's looking to do damage to you. There's a huge plethora of different threat actors out there that carry out these attacks. So getting a good picture and understanding your adversary is key part to the response. And we'll look at the organizational structure of these criminal gangs, these groups, how are they organized, and why is that important for executives at businesses to understand their adversary and how their adversary operates. And then we'll look at putting together a strategy for negotiation if you are in the unfortunate position of suffering a ransomware attack or the beginnings of a ransomware attack. it's important to shape the right strategy to respond to it, and particularly how you actually engage and how you make decisions around dealing with the criminal group. So that drops down into thinking about sharing our insights on some of the different considerations that businesses have to think about when they're trying to put together these strategies for response. They're all different. Every business has a different business profile, different operations. You work in different sectors, and if your business is affected and your operations are affected, then depending on how you operate, where you operate, what customers you service, your response and your strategy to respond to these events is going to be slightly nuanced and different. So it's important to think about that from the specific business perspective. So ransomware, I mean, most people know what this is. I mean, it's a security incident, cybersecurity incident that where threat actor encrypts files on a victim's network or assets and looks to extort the ransom in exchange for a decryption key or data. We're seeing a lot of these. It is probably 90% plus of our response work on our cyber incident response practice. Range and sophistication from relatively simple attacks to very, very well organized, very well planned, sophisticated attacks that cause significant damage. Theft of data is more or less par for the course in ransomware. It's an additional lever that criminals can use to extort funds or put pressure on in a negotiation, and we see it in most events. The impact of these events is typically pretty far-reaching, but it can range from just full paralysis. Well, from full paralysis of operations to a small subset, or potentially a database or a server or a system being held hostage. And certainly we've seen over the last year or so some increasing confidence and better organization in how these threat actor groups work. They start to understand or understand well the response and the Western response to how to handle and set up responses, particularly the insurance response. So staying ahead of the game is a challenge. What you're seeing here is some data. This is data on lots of different ransomware criminal groups that we've observed. We're highlighting one particular group called Heyrick compared with other groups, and we're looking at 3 different behaviors around their negotiation approach. And at the very beginning of the response, it's absolutely fundamental to get as full a picture of understanding who you're dealing with, what criminal group this is likely to be. So that will inform some ideas around how this criminal group might behave if you had to enter into a negotiation with them. So things like understanding what is their likely discount rate, how might they negotiate, how long might that negotiation take, what are confidence levels around data recovery if you have to end up paying a ransom for the decryption keys. So you can see that Heyrick is one of the largest. You've seen some of the largest demands from this criminal group. However, they are prepared to negotiate. We've seen them negotiating in most of the response cases they've been involved with, and typically we see a pretty high reduction in at least where the initial demand was, typically in the region of 50%. That is changing. Many of these ransomware gangs are pretty savvy technically. They are well aware of the impact that their attacks have on your organization, and it's increasingly difficult to actually extract any sort of demand reduction from them, which is why it's absolutely critical to have extortion specialists that are able to help put together a strategy for how you set up your negotiation strength path. So We'll now look at operating structure. So how do these groups build their operations, how they structured, what are the roles and responsibilities they play, and how does that feed into planning for businesses? Well, ransomware gangs, we all know that their one motivation is making money. So their business operates by attacking businesses and extorting money in response for decryption keys. And just like any other business, they are structured to make money. So they'll have roles and responsibilities within the team. So they'll have a product team who are developing ransomware, building the product, and they'll have a sales team who are essentially a lead generation team. And these individuals will be researching targets. They'll be going through looking at databases of businesses in certain sectors, using any information that they can get their hands on online. Most businesses, particularly in jurisdictions where there's a lot of transparency over business reporting and business information, are attractive targets, and there's plenty of information for these front-end teams to gather as much open source intelligence on your business, on the people in your business, the financial standing of your business, and potentially inform some of the planning around what IT infrastructure you might have. So they'll be using tools to scan the environment, and then once they've found a sort of a foothold in your organization, maybe they've compromised your environment through a phishing attack or something, they will hand over that lead to the technical team who are then looking to execute the ransomware attack. And these are the guys that are getting into the system, moving from system to system, mapping out the environment so that when they come to deploy the ransomware, it is as broadly distributed as possible and the attack is as effective as possible. And obviously, once that a decryption's been deployed, there's a negotiating team that come in. These individuals will be pretty well briefed on the attack. The planning may have taken place over 2 or 3 months to actually get into the organization, and they would have been well briefed on the victim. They will probably have had an opportunity to read some of the data that's been stolen. It might be internal operational data, legal documents, or insurance documents. So they tend to be very well informed about the businesses that they've attacked. And why is that important to know? For business owners and managers, when you think about how you're going to position your business to prevent and respond to these attacks, it's important to understand how your adversary operates, because you can put in the appropriate controls that map to the activities that these individuals are carrying out. So just like the lead generation teams are doing phishing attacks, having the appropriate training and awareness exercises within your organization and making your staff aware of the importance of phishing training is obviously going to help harden your resilience. In the same way, having the right vendor management program to make sure that any exposed assets aren't unnecessarily exposed to the internet is key, and then there aren't any vulnerabilities, and having the right email security to try and prevent access to your environment insofar as possible. And the technical teams, there are plenty of things that businesses can be doing to make these technical teams roles much harder. So whilst it's very easy for them to find leaked credentials or be passed leaked credentials from the lead generation teams, actually accessing an environment that has the right technical controls and the right monitoring tools in place, just in the same way of a lot of the services and platforms that METCLOUD offer. These are the types of things that can make your exposure as a business minimized and your ability to respond to these attacks much more elevated and much more effective. And at the management level, having an improved awareness of who you're dealing with and how these attacks play out, as well as the right network of partners to call in the event of a response, is going to in the same way as any sort of technical operational control, it's going to make your business a more resilient to these attacks. So there are things you can be doing, structuring them around, making the roles of the ransomware threat actors harder is something to think about. So, however, when SRM respond to an incident call, typically it is too late. There's been a ransomware attack. In the best case scenario, we do get called in when there is a suspected incident and there is still an ongoing compromise. But most of the time, there's been some sort of effective ransomware attack, and a business is struggling to operate in some shape or form. And at that point, we are looking to help the business get as good a sense of their position across all different functions as possible, and in order to inform key critical decisions around how to engage with the threat actor. For an executive team that's facing these types of attacks, there's typically two questions that they need to answer at the start of a response. One is, do they need to engage? Are they in a position where they have no other choice but to engage with the criminal group? And are they in a position where they have to make a payment or not to recover the business? In order to answer those questions as effectively as possible, it's absolutely critical to very early on in the response set up a work stream that focuses on the engagement decision with the threat actor. But it's not always as straightforward a decision to be made. A lot of the time, the CEO will be struggling and just want to make a payment to make the problem go away. But it's not always as simple as that, and taking that approach more often than not causes more problems than it does create solutions. So we will help build a picture of the criminal gang, so by collecting threat actor intelligence, and that might be forensic artifacts, whatever we can find out online about the criminal group. We'll use our own historical data, threat intelligence data from the breaches that we've been involved in. We have partners and agencies that we work with that share data to help identify criminal groups as early on in the response as possible. And we'll bring the senior management teams into the same room so that we can all get as clear a picture of the business's operations as possible, and think about some of the considerations that are specific to the business at that point to make an informed decision around threat actor engagement. So that'll be thinking about legal issues. Obviously there's a sanctions risk when you're making payment to a criminal gang, so you've got to step through the cost benefit analysis of that. Thinking about the reputational from a customer and an internal member of staff perspective is fundamental. You're dealing with payments to very bad actors, so thinking about how that type of activity might be viewed through the lens of your customers is going to be different from business to business. And in the same way, there may well be other activities going on in responding to these attacks, like trying to get as clear a sense of your backup status as possible before making any firm decisions around whether you have to make an engagement with the threat actor or not. So we'll help businesses step through that, put some shape around how they do that and orchestrate that. And in a best case scenario, we can get that business to a point where they can answer that first question, that they do not have to engage with the threat actor. Perhaps they can recover in a different way, or they can rebuild data in a manual way, or they can write data off without incurring too much cost. But if the answer to that question is that they don't have any other options but to engage with the threat actor, then there's an additional process that has to be stepped through to develop the negotiation strategy. It's not always crystal clear what that strategy is at the beginning. It's not always about just making a payment to recover decryption keys. The strategy may be more nuanced than that, and it might be about establishing confidence levels around what type of data has been lost. So you might want to be challenging this criminal group on some of the claims that they've made about data and data sensitivity, the volume of data that they've lost, the type of data that they possess. So that might be the initial objectives of the negotiations, to try and get some clarity on the strength of the bad actors negotiation position. And with any investigation, before you send any money, you're going to look to verify that these criminal groups can do what they say they can do. So you're verifying proof of life and verifying that they have indeed stolen data, if that's what they're making claims on. And then you step through a negotiation process up to that point at which you have to make a decision whether you have no other alternative to make a payment to a criminal group or not. And obviously this is absolutely the last option. We would only ever support making a payment once we've gone through all these considerations and verified that there is no other way to recover the business, and ultimately it is just a decision for the business on whether they go through that process. Settlement, we would work with there are specialist cryptocurrency brokers that arrange these types of payments. There is a compliance and anti-money laundering check that supports and makes sure that anything that we do or we're involved with or the business does is compliant insofar as possible, and there's a process to execute the payment and recover the decryption keys to get the business back up and running. So this is the typical kind of negotiation and engagement path. It's something that executives and business leaders should be thinking about before they have to face this. A lot of the considerations for your business can be documented before facing off to this type of problem. So something to build into planning. I think we've talked a little bit about some of these considerations, but to expand on them, obviously the cost of the incident is going to be a critical factor in whether you need to make a payment or engage with a criminal group. So what is this event's cost in terms of business interruption to you? If you are a high volume manufacturing business that cannot process any orders, and has lost lots of historical data, clearly there's going to be a significant day-to-day cost of not being operational. For businesses that are more sort of service-based, that are still able to operate and provide advice in other ways, then there's not going to be quite such a critical impact in terms of costs on the business. So, actually thinking about your business and how some of these issues might present themselves in the event that you have a ransomware attack is a really important part of planning, and certainly an absolutely fundamental part of putting together a strategy for response. One of the often misunderstood or sort of misconceived issues with ransomware is the speed at which a business is able to recover once they've gone through these events. There's a kind of perception that once you make a payment or once you receive decryption keys, or if you install your viable backups immediately, then you're able to be operational as normal that day. But it's simply not the case with medium to large enterprises. Most of the restoration or the recovery periods that we're involved in and see stretch into weeks, where systems and hardware has to be replaced. The significant hangovers in terms of data subject notifications, and lots of other activities that will go into rebuilding and getting your business operational. And actually going through that negotiation process with the criminal group often takes time to build that picture of the group, discuss with senior management, step through and develop a strategy, and then actually execute that negotiation process. What you're trying to surface is how much time you've got to negotiate, because in these events, time is the most important asset that a business has, and the more time that you have to actually drag out a negotiation with these criminal groups, the more likely you're going to get a satisfactory result. So thinking about how you improve your recovery timelines is about looking at your backup strategy and making sure that's effective, and then making sure you're keeping an up-to-date asset inventory, because getting a really clear picture of the breadth of impact in your environment is one of the things that's going to give you a much speedier recovery. There are different payment options. If the worst comes to the worst, typically we work with a payment broker whose role it is to actually procure cryptocurrency and then effect these payments. They are insurance approved, and it's relatively seamless to do this. However, we have worked with clients that prefer to use their own name accounts or execute transactions through payment brokers and other independent exchanges. They all have their different benefits and disadvantages, but there are options for doing these, but hopefully only employed in the worst case scenario. So just moving on. So in terms of just thinking about as a business, what are the kind of key takeaways from this piece that we've discussed today about the executive awareness? And that's really knowing who you're dealing with is absolutely crucial for making the correct decisions, and that's both for response and for planning. So making sure your senior management team are effectively properly aware of the threat and how this threat manifests itself will help in the long term. Accurate threat intelligence informs the response strategy, and making sure that you've got a post-incident or an incident response plan before an incident will provide for a much more rapid and effective response. And when you're actually thinking about, well, how do I set up a negotiation, or how do I step through this dealings with the criminal group, there are a whole load of considerations that aren't typically initially considered around financial, legal, regulatory and ethical concerns. So thinking about how you're going to respond to a ransomware attack before you actually face these attacks, both in terms of the controls that you put in place, as well as the playbooks that you and your executive team to how you'd approach a ransom demand, is a really key part of incident planning, and will make a huge difference to how effective any response to this attack would be. And of course, engage with experts as early as possible, and make sure you've got the right network that you can call, both for your resilience and your planning, as well as for your response. So there's a few top tips here which we'll share with the slide deck afterwards, but it's the things we talked around: controls, making sure you've got the right vulnerability management program in place. Your staff are trained to report phishing and not to click links, and that you've got the right endpoint protection in place, and you've got a kind of minimum use of administrative credentials and a good backup policy. These are really the top 5 things that we see leading to a compromise that may end up in a ransomware attack. So that's the end of the SRM presentation. Just going to hand over to Ian to pick up and talk to you about how METCLOUD can help defend against this particular threat.
Thanks, Roddy. I don't know if it's just me, but I could listen to that for hours. It's so interesting. Less so interesting, I guess, is the bit that I'm going to cover about METCLOUD, but hopefully there will be some little nuggets there that you could potentially take away from today's presentation and implement into your own businesses. You know, we've looked at how we can best offer defense and response services to our customers. It's a fast-moving sector that we operate in, and we're having to scale and bring in more expertise consistently as the threat actors become more sophisticated in their capability to actually be very successful in what they're trying to do, and that's obviously extract significant funds from corporations. So who are METCLOUD? So METCLOUD was launched as a brand in 2017 in response really to this exponential threat of cybercrime. We saw quite early on around 2013-14 that there was a growing trend of activity and malware that was being deployed across the internet. And in response to this, our own UK government set up National Cybersecurity Centre in 2016. So you know, we were really quite at the forefront of what was going on in this sector of cybersecurity, and at the same time, in parallel, there was a huge innovation going on around cloud technologies and so forth. And a lot of businesses had invested significant sums of money in cybersecurity and security technologies to protect an on-premise environment, but had very little knowledge and expertise around how they would actually protect and implement the same kind of defense layers in a cloud environment. So we set about developing a capability in a business that could operate across all these different types of disciplines, both cybersecurity and cloud. Yeah. Okay, that should come up. Yeah, there we go. So METCLOUD, we are, in all intents and purposes, our own private cloud, and my slide is actually talking about how we have developed our business since 2017. So 4 years later, it's been a journey that we've been going through, and this should hopefully explain how we have implemented a series of technology layers and capabilities to help protect our customers who run their critical business systems in our cloud environment. And at some point in my presentation, talk about how we protect data and assets that sit outside of our immediate cloud environment, but also sit in Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and so forth. So we have now built out 2 UK data centers. Reason for doing that is that you know, lots of our clients have requirements that they have to demonstrate data sovereignty. So it was key that we could actually implement a UK presence. We also needed high resilience. So our UK data centers are connected by high-speed fiber so that we have that failover and resilience. And has particularly come into its own since the proliferation and growth of ransomware, as we can reach out to fallback systems and DR environments really rapidly and allow companies to restore their operations as quickly and as swiftly as possible. Now, we have created all of our systems around enterprise class compute and storage, and they are fully monitored and managed 24/7 so that we can actually make sure that the systems are available. In Microsoft Azure and other cloud providers, they tend to contractually offer up 3 nines, so 99.9% availability for service level performance. We have elements in our systems that can provide 5 nines, and across the whole platform 4 nines. So highly available environment, highly performant, and highly resilient. So I touched on about our sort of invention and innovation of our cloud environment ourselves, and but without offering a much higher level of enterprise grade cybersecurity, then we would fall foul of many other system providers that haven't thought about how to implement significant layers of cybersecurity wrap around this. And this is the area that we have gone on to win over 50 awards internationally and nationally, recognizing the innovation that we've brought to what we are delivering as a service. And Roddy touched on earlier on around the kind of management and system implementations, processes and policies that companies should consider to implement to help themselves defend against ransom attacks and other data cybercrime activities and so forth. But if I just run through a couple and name how we believe that are key takeaways for businesses to consider, whether they come to METCLOUD or they reach out to other providers, we do believe that some of these implementations will be pivotal in protecting yourselves against ransom attacks. And I would probably pull out of this list SOC as a service, so cybersecurity operations center services. The pricing of that service delivery capability has tumbled over the years. Initially, it was very much a high ticket price capability that large enterprises could only afford, but we believe it's now affordable for most businesses now. There are a number of increasing service providers that can provide SOC as a service. But I'll touch on a little bit how we've implemented it slightly and how we've taken integrating in everything that we do to offer a really swift and agile way of actually detecting and remediating potential threats that exist in an infrastructure similar to what we've created in METCLOUD. So I touched on earlier on that we have our customers who connect to METCLOUD, and maybe in 2017 most businesses just migrated their systems across into our environment, and in doing so had the experience of a private cloud experience, and we could actually implement very, very considerable significant levels of cybersecurity wrap around that. Obviously, with the increase of applications being delivered through multiple different cloud platforms, we've now had to develop and architect a way that we can provide customers onward journeys into AWS, Azure, IBM Cloud, Google Cloud, and other cloud providers, so that we can actually ensure that the user and the company themselves are protected through that journey. And then we have a cyber incident response team, and this is where, again, it's been part of our journey as to, right, okay, we've now protected the business as best we can. We are evolving the technology stack all the time to make sure that our customers are as protected as they can be from some potential cyber attack. But we also have to accept that there may be an occasion in the future that our customer or a customer in our portfolio is compromised by a ransom attack. And we have to have a team that is well skilled, well versed, and being part of the customer's team around the cyber incident response. So we have a well-detailed process and plan in action where it's rehearsed on a regular basis so that we can effect a very speedy response time for the customer to get back to full operations. We do this through DR exercises, and we also do tabletop workshops with our customers so that the senior leadership teams are well versed and are well practiced in knowing what happens when a certain event happens. So that was METCLOUD in a very, very swift explanation of who we are, what we do, and how we go about delivering the most effective way of protecting our customers from a data breach, a ransom attack, and so forth. Clearly, it's very highly sophisticated. We've spent many, many years perfecting what we do. We work with some significant partners in our ecosystem to help deliver this capability. and it's evolving all the time. You know, we add new partners as and when we feel it's appropriate, and they come with new technologies that can advance our capability in protecting organizations. We like working, obviously, with companies like SRM, who have an incredible expertise around risk management and handling these kind of situations around ransom attacks. And you know, obviously, we also, as part of this whole ecosystem, get referred to from SRM into their customer base as well. Hopefully that we can help their customers and insurance clients that can protect themselves from being attacked again in the future. So that's from me. I'd like to obviously come back to Roddy and Heyrick if we can, because we do have some questions from the audience. I don't know whether Roddy or Heyrick want to answer
sure.
the following, but one of the questions that has been asked by the audience is, why is ransomware fast becoming the most common cyber attack? And are you seeing any evidence that this may change in 2022?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I mean, my comment on this would be, there's a couple of things. I think these are relatively easy attacks to execute. There's a few different attack vectors that criminals can actually access environments through. There's a lot of pretty poor and underinvested security environments out there, and I think there's still probably a pretty low level of awareness about the ransomware threat and the things that need to be done to make businesses more resilient. You know, I think particularly around the responses that we've done within schools, university and educational facilities. There just isn't the kind of resources and the budget and the security knowledge to actually put in the right security controls and invest properly. And as a result, these particular profile of clients have seen a huge amount of attacks, and they've been victims because they also carry a lot of personal data. So there's a big regulatory risk, and these criminal groups, they know that. And you know, I think when we saw, you know, the initial pickup in ransomware attacks, you know, going, you know, a few years back, we were often seeing ransom demands in the sort of tens of thousands. You don't see that anymore. You don't really see single-digit millions in terms of the initial demand, because these criminal groups know that once they've actually, you know, if a business is unable to operate, there's absolutely no reason why they should drop their demands down or ask for less money than they can get. They're also well aware that, you know, there is an insurance response that's pretty well developed to this type of attack, and until things change across the industry, there is still an extortion cover that's either written directly into cyber insurance policies or in coverage by, you know, by proxy and other types of policies. So it's a type of attack that pays pretty well for criminal gangs. You know, I think the future for these types of attacks is going to come from challenges the insurance response, either, you know, mandating not to pay any extortion payouts, making it much more difficult for applicants to get insurance cover without demonstrating they've got the right controls in place, from, you know, a policy response at the government level, to, you know, take some steps to put in either kind of regulatory you know, restrictions around engaging with these criminal groups, or enhanced sanctions against a wider universe of criminal groups, or a change in the law. And at the moment, you know, the law, certainly in the UK, mostly globally, only kind of captures the receipt of criminal funds, for through the Proceeds of Crime Act. So it's only really the receipt of criminal funds that is outlawed, rather than the payment of criminal funds, which is why we're not seeing any kind of restrictions on making ransom payments. That goes back to traditional ransoms for pirates and things, but and yeah, so I think probably we will see some change, but as long as there's money to be made, and there's an appetite from businesses to pay to get there, so that they don't go bust, there'll probably be still ransomware attacks.
Thanks for that. Another question that's come up, which is sort of similar in the respect that what's the worst impact you've witnessed on an organization? Obviously not naming names unless they went public afterwards. So obviously you may be free to say, but that has been contributed or has been as a result of ransomware. And the second part of that question is there a general rate per employee or percentage of turnover when ransom values are set?
I mean, good questions. The worst impact we witnessed, I mean, you've seen multi-billion-dollar businesses simply unable to operate and unable to do business on a day-to-day basis. For me, some of the kind of when you classify bad impact is, I think, back to technology businesses that provide check-in systems to hospitals for patients not able to actually operate. So when that software can't operate, hospitals can't operate, and there's a real human harm impact from these types of attacks. And we have seen these on a number of times, and it's very damaging. It's very stressful for the owners of the software and for their downstream clients as well. And that's where you get these businesses that have a kind of business to business multiplier effect. There's a kind of domino effect in terms of the number of people and businesses that are impacted. When it comes to setting ransom demands, I think there's been some pretty high profile ransom demands. I think we saw 45 million for a law firm that was supposed to have had Donald Trump's tax accountant's paperwork last year. So there isn't a calculation. They tend to be in the millions. You do get some that are looking for a quick smash and grab. Most of the time, these are very sophisticated criminal groups that have specifically targeted a particular type of organization. They've spent several months within the environment. They've researched the people, the insurance cover, and when it comes to negotiation, they're asking for a payment that they know is possible, and they tend not to budge. So yeah.
Okay.
I'll just add on that, Ian. Is
please, Heyrick.
Roddy's point on the insurance cover is, we've seen from our forensics that they do target, the details around the insurance coverage, and therefore they know what sort of payment levels they can expect to receive. And actually, what we end up seeing is a pretty transactional process in terms of length of time, because businesses are hamstrung until the ransom's paid, and so if they've got the insurance coverage, they're pretty keen to pay. What I think will be really interesting, which Roddy alluded to on the first question, is just seeing how that changes when and if insurers are unable to insure a ransom or underwrite a ransom and therefore pay for it, and so companies will be expected to pay themselves, but actually may or may not be able to afford to.
It's interesting, and obviously yourself, Heyrick, and Roddy will know a little bit more about what conversations are going on in the background with insurance companies. But as a company that is a little bit removed from that conversation piece at the moment with the insurance companies, but from what I've heard, sort of on the grapevine, is that policies are about to increase significantly over the coming years. You know, we've seen in the US already doubling of policy costs. I had one customer come to us recently, now a customer, but they weren't at the time, but they've come to us now because they couldn't get insurance renewed. They were refused cyber insurance. And we've had another customer that we secured a little time back where they were told by a large, supply chain that they had to increase their capability around cybersecurity significantly to have their contract renewed, and they came to us, and we were able to migrate their systems onto our platform so that they could tick the sufficient boxes that could get them through the contract negotiations renewal. So there's lots of pinch points happening in the marketplace at the moment to maybe change companies' behaviors around what's going on with the cyber activity and cybercrime and so forth. I was just wondering what you're seeing at the moment, because I guess you are, you're in the eye of the storm all the time, and you're seeing, what the impact is for businesses when you're doing these negotiations. What's their sort of behavioural or appetite change afterwards when they've been through that process? What are they saying then to you afterwards?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ian. I mean, we're seeing pretty much similar stuff to you, actually. I think to answer your last question is, how does their attitude change? It really depends on if they've still got insurance coverage. So if I'm to be brutally honest, if they've got insurance coverage, they're pretty relaxed about improving their cyber resilience. They'll do the obvious things, but they won't go to town on it because they know they can. Their risk transfer is the insurance policy. Now, when that is no longer available, that's when conversations about Macleod and what can be done to support their infrastructure and secure it better become much more relevant. And so I think that is what we're going to begin to see over the next 12 to 18 months. But in addition, there are clients that I think are looking at these huge increases in the insurance premium and wondering whether it's worth it or whether to take the risk and do some, put some basics in place from a cybersecurity perspective, and ensure that they've got a good team on hand to respond if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I never cease to be amazed by some of the attitudes sometimes by corporates still, considering when, what happened recently with British Airways and the data breach that they happened to find themselves in about 2 years ago. That's, I think, just become a class action, and I think it was settled out of court for quite a significant sum of money. So many businesses' first initial mindset is, do we really want a big fine from the Information Commissioner's office? But that tends to be a small fraction of the overall cost when actually you do get faced with class action and legal, damages. And then there's obviously the reputational damage and shareholder value afterwards. So you put everything into place. The ransom is often a very small figure compared to what the potential outcome could look like. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think what we'll see actually is the regulatory fines will increase over time. I think it was fairly lenient for BA, if on that particular example, but we're seeing some coming through already out of from the Irish regulator just over the past few weeks, and we're going to see much more of it. And if we think back to UK Bribery Act when that first came into play, it's a similar pattern where there are some fines that come through to begin with, and they usually target big business that can quite frankly afford to pay, and then it becomes much more widespread. And I think that where the companies and our clients will have to pay particular attention is that if that risk transfer is removed from an insurance perspective, they've got the prospect of paying a ransom, and also that as the perfect storm as those regulatory fines start ramping up.
Yeah, no, agreed. So I'm just conscious of time now. I think we're coming up to the hour. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Heyrick or Roddy? Anything more that you wanted to say while we're on?
Just thanks everyone for joining, and feel free to reach out if there's any other questions.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to come on to today's webinar. We will be doing more of these webinar activities and events over the next 12 months. So hopefully everyone can stay tuned. We will try and keep the content updated and refreshed so that anyone who's been on these talks previously can continue to come on to these events. But I'd like to thank you both for coming on, and thanks Heyrick, thanks Roddy, and then also a special thanks to Amanda for pulling all this together, who's head of our marketing, and thanks Amanda for doing that. So thank you everyone, and hope you all have a very good day, and thank you to everyone out there who's tuned in and listened into our webinar today. Thank you everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Take care. Bye bye.